Welcome back to the Five Insider with me, Olivia Buzaglo, and of course with David Ornstein. Now, David, I feel like there's only one place to start, really. Declan Rice has been, everyone's been talking about him, but there has been developments, hasn't there, involving another club, and that club is Manchester City.
Yeah, it's important to say that despite Arsenal making the most concrete early moves for Declan Rice, having 2 bids rejected, we have reported, I think it was late last week, that Manchester City were considering making an approach of their own to West Ham for Rice and to try and sign him. And that has now developed because Manchester City, at the time of recording this, we don't know the exact status, are expected to submit an offer to West Ham for Declan Rice. When exactly that has or will go in, let's wait and see. But their interest is serious, it's concrete, and they will follow it up with a formal proposal to rival Arsenal for this signing. And that really puts the cat amongst the pigeons, because there was maybe a consensus in the public domain that it is Arsenal's deal, it's theirs to lose it, and maybe that is still going to prove to be the case. But with İlkay Gündoğan leaving Manchester City, there's clearly need to strengthen in midfield. There's uncertainty over the future of Bernardo Silva, and Rice appears to have emerged as a genuine candidate for them. And so it appears that we have a 2-horse race for what's expected to be one of the biggest deals of the summer transfer window.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously City haven't made the bid yet, but there was reports that perhaps they could include a player in that as well, and that maybe one of those names floating about was Kalvin Phillips. Is there anything in that, or do you think it will just be money?
Well, I think West Ham, who appear to be the sort of winners in this situation, because any bidding war would drive up the price potentially and could suit them. Although there will come a point where if he's going to be leaving, they want to get this done so that they can crack on with plans of their own. But for the meantime, we're still early in the window, and they will probably be enjoying this contest. They'll be open to all scenarios, I suspect, whether that be just the straight cash or players going in the opposite direction. There have been reports that Arsenal might have suggested some players, or West Ham might have asked for some Arsenal players as well as the money. But so far, it's just been money from Arsenal's perspective. And let's see if they come back in with an improved third offer to try and get this wrapped up or remain in contention. There were then some reports yesterday of Manchester United coming in with some money plus players. And I think there's an element of truth in that, but I don't know if it has developed. I'm not aware of it having done so. And of course, as you say, when Manchester City's interest emerged, the name Kalvin Phillips did come up in dispatches. But to my knowledge, Kalvin Phillips wants to stay at Manchester City. I think he even said this when he was on international duty. Now, it'll be interesting to see if that conflicts with what Manchester City want. Perhaps they would like to trade him and create space in that midfield, but it takes 2 to tango. He's only a year into his contract. And so I would suspect the easier thing for all clubs in this situation, in terms of Arsenal or Manchester City, would be a financial deal. Don't forget that if a Manchester City player comes to West Ham, then West Ham are going to need to afford to pay their wages. And at Man City, you get far higher wages. So if a player is going to move, they would either have to have that matched, bettered, or even accept a pay reduction if they're going to get involved. So it can start to get really complicated with players moving in the other direction. That tends to take more time. And so at this point, I would see it being more cash. But with Manchester United, if that interest is credible, then you can understand why they might try and form that sort of solution, because there's uncertainty of their ownership, and that's having an impact on their finances and their ability to move in the market. So, but from my knowledge and understanding, it's mainly a financial conversation at the moment.
And we don't know what this Manchester City bid is going to be or when it's going to come, but it is. Obviously, we heard that Arsenal have had 2 bids rejected. Do you think there's going to be similarities in the way that Arsenal have bid and the way that City might, in terms of add-ons and stuff, that might be maybe more favourable for West Ham?
The truth is, I don't know, Liv, because these are private sort of conversations and negotiations, and proposals that can be very intricate and detailed in their makeup, in terms of what you're going to put down as a fixed fee, how long you're going to pay that fixed fee over in terms of duration. What are the bonuses, the add-ons? How long will it take for them to be paid, and how will they be paid? And within that, there's then salary values and agents' commissions, and these packages are so complex, or can be, that I don't know where Arsenal and Man City will be on that front. Clearly, there seems to be a consensus, just because of Manchester City's financial stability, that they have the ability to go higher than Arsenal, or maybe make the terms a little bit more attractive. However, given how heavily Arsenal are prioritising Declan Rice, you would suspect they would try as far as possible to go toe-to-toe, or even better the terms. But then, if they manage to do that, it will come down to the player's preference. Of course, West Ham will have a say in the matter, but what Declan Rice wants to do will become the big question. And I suspect Arsenal will be pushing him to declare for them, and Manchester City will be doing likewise. We've seen factors such as London and Mikel Arteta and Arsenal's upward trajectory, but I'm sure few players would turn their nose up at Manchester City, treble winners playing under Pep Guardiola and all of that. So these really are sort of critical moments in the future of Rice.
Yeah, I'm sure Arsenal fans are not going to be enjoying this now, and they sort of had those 2 bids rejected and thought that maybe he was on their way to the Emirates.
Sorry, Liv, one thing I would just add on that is, look, we've seen these situations go both ways in the past. I think back to Willian when he was close to joining Tottenham. They had put in all the groundwork, and then Chelsea just swooped in and managed to get it done. And a lot of people saying, Arsenal have worked so long and hard on this. Maybe sometimes that will count for something, but maybe sometimes it doesn't, because ultimately it's who takes that final step and wins the day. And many people watching this will have found many examples of how transfers have twisted late. Mykhailo Mudryk, when Arsenal had seemingly got there, and then Chelsea nipped in January. It seems to be a common theme with Chelsea, but Manchester City have had scenarios of their own. I think they were quite far down the line with Jorginho back in the day, and he went to Chelsea. They got quite far with Harry Maguire, and he went to Manchester United. So the list goes on. Nobody has a divine right to make these signings. It's who comes up with the best package and moves quickly and manages to get the agreements in place. And if Arsenal now manage to pull this off, some of those who you say, won't be enjoying this conversation will feel all the more sweeter if they manage to actually come out on the right side of this. And at this point in time, there's nothing to say that they won't. So it's quite enticing if you're a neutral, less so if you're partisan and have a vested interest.
And this also could have a domino effect, couldn't it? Because obviously, if for whatever, say Rice does go to Man City, then Arsenal will perhaps maybe look for Moises Caicedo, and Chelsea want Moises Caicedo. So it could have a domino effect on other clubs going for other players, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that midfield position is key for so many of them. We know that Chelsea want one more after getting Enzo Fernandez in January, and they've been perceived as the front runners for Moises Caicedo, but there's nothing guaranteed, as we're seeing with Rice. And so, they don't have Champions League football, but they've got an exciting project potentially with Mauricio Pochettino and all these new players trying to rebuild. There's clearly a bit of a relationship there with Brighton and Hove Albion, the movement of players and staff in recent times. Arsenal, of course, looked at Declan Rice in January. For whatever reason, it wasn't possible, or they didn't act upon it. They turned their attention to Moises Caicedo, and they had a couple of bids rejected by Brighton. He stayed, he signed a new contract, but there seems to be this understanding that if the right price arrives for Brighton, they won't stand in his way, which is a bit of a club policy. And so you do think to yourself, will Arsenal turn back to him now? He's clearly not been their priority in this window because they've focused on Declan Rice. But that's not to say that any club can't change their path. And I'm sure all the clubs are keeping abreast of developments and keeping in touch with clubs and representatives to understand the lie of the land. And so, if Declan Rice doesn't come off, which I don't think Arsenal will really be contemplating at this point because they focus so heavily on him, they adore him. They want to build around him. He'll be the sort of centerpiece of their project. But if the worst case scenario happens, then of course they've got a recruitment team who may look at Caicedo. There may be others. We've seen Romeo Lavia linked quite heavily to Arsenal. I'm not sure of that one developing at this point in time, but let's see. These things can change in seconds, in minutes. And then within all of that, you've got City, of course, who will need to find something, having missed out on Jude Bellingham. And then Ilkay Gundogan has departed. Maybe Bernardo Silva goes as well. What will happen with Kalvin Phillips? You've got Liverpool, who are still looking to strengthen in their midfield, as far as we know, despite the signing of Alexis McAllister. They're short in a couple of positions, given the departures of James Milner, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. And you've got Manchester United as well, who want a midfielder, although as far as we know, they're focused on the more advanced one in Mason Mount at this point in time, and a number 9. They are looking at the other positions, and you'll have seen reports about Onana at Everton. I'm led to believe he's on the list, and like many, he's one of many options they're considering. But they've got their ownership situation, which is complicating it all. So this market, Liv, is just absolutely wild. There are so many unpredictabilities, and it almost feels like transfer deadline day is happening every day. Yet we're only in June, and we go through to the 31st of August.
Oh, it's ridiculous. You mentioned his name there, Mason Mount. It does feel like this move to Manchester United from Chelsea, it is looking more likely. There was a report suggesting yesterday that his representatives came out and said that he won't be signing a contract extension at Chelsea. So do you think this deal is sort of a matter of almost when and not if now?
No, I don't think so, because Chelsea clearly have a valuation of Mason Mount, and you can sit on whatever side of the debate you like. You could say that with a year to go and he's not been playing much this season and contract negotiations haven't gone well, Chelsea signed Raheem Sterling for a lower amount than they're asking for Mason Mount. They've sold Mateo Kovacic for much less. He's older, but he only had a year to go, and he's a really talented midfielder. You can make all the comparisons you want, but Chelsea clearly have quite a high valuation for him. It was £70 million plus £10 million. As of the reports yesterday, including one from myself, Chelsea seem to have conceded a bit of ground on that, in that they...
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they then conceded a little bit of ground on that initial £70 million mark?
There's a realism in this that, Manchester United, when they say they have an upper limit, I think they mean it, and they're not going to go on bidding forever. I would expect them to bid again and sort of try and reach an agreement, but they're not going to go up to the 70 plus 10 that Chelsea were looking for. And I think Chelsea are probably, on the one hand, receptive somewhat to Mount's desire to join Manchester United. And despite it being a bit of a messy situation, trying to cooperate in some way, shape or form. And knowledgeable that, if he comes back for pre-season and it doesn't go too well and he runs down his contract, then they face losing him for free. And you want to have a happy camp. And I'm not suggesting that Mason Mount will be anything other than the consummate professional. And he's a top player. Who knows? Maybe he'll be reintegrated by Maurizio Pochettino and go on to have a really good season. Maybe even sign a new contract. Despite the reports that that's not the intention at the moment. Like, I'm not shooting down or confirming anything on this. It's just so unpredictable. So I think Chelsea, just being realistic on what you are going to achieve, have probably lowered their expectations somewhat. And now let's see if Manchester United come higher and Chelsea go a little bit lower still. Part of me thinks that an agreement is going to be reached on this one and everybody will see sense in the end. But one thing we need to remember is that Chelsea don't really have to now, because the windfall that they will earn from selling Kai Havertz and Mateo Kovacic negates a lot of the need.
You took the words right out of my mouth, David. I was literally going to be like, a Chelsea now in a slightly different position, because they've just sold, especially Kai Havertz, for nearly 65 million, or what's being reported at that price.
Yeah, I think so. And it's in the region of 65 million pounds, maybe a tiny bit more. And that's going to go through soon. If all goes to plan, he'll have his medical over the weekend, maybe abroad. And Arsenal will try and announce it probably next week. And then Mateo Kovacic as well, going to City, brings in more money. Maybe a number of players going to Saudi Arabia adds to the, strength of Chelsea's financial position, especially when they need to comply with financial fair play, which all intents and purposes, they sound quite confident of doing. And so, yeah, the Mason Mount money becomes less critical for them. But equally, I think, if they feel Manchester United are getting towards the valuation, and Mason Mount has been very clear that that is his preference if he's to leave Chelsea, and the uncertainty over how next season would go with all of this having taken place beforehand, and then the likelihood that he would leave as a free agent for absolutely no transfer fee in the summer of 2024 probably leads you to think that an agreement is more likely than not. But I could be wrong on that. Another thing to factor in, Liv, is that Mason Mount's an academy product, as you well know, having covered the club for years. And so he represents zero book value. Everything that Chelsea gained for him in transfer fee is profit. That's not the case with Kai Havertz, who they bought for 90 odd million only a few years ago. It's not the case for Kalidou Koulibaly, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Hakim Ziyech, Edouard Mendy. And so the way in which Chelsea can represent an enormous profit right now is through the likes of Mason Mount, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Conor Gallagher, and of all of those, Trevor Chalobah, but of all of those, the one that the situation is most advanced with is Mason Mount. So I'd be a little bit surprised if a deal doesn't get done now, but it's not guaranteed at this point in time.
Manchester United, of course, I feel like they've always been linked with Harry Kane. And it does feel like that perhaps maybe if he was to leave Spurs, it will be this summer. What does Harry Kane need to do anything himself? Does he have to try and force through a move to make any deal happen?
I've seen the reports, I think it was in The Sun, and by Neil Custis, a really good journalist in his own right. And so clearly Manchester United would want Harry Kane to push if he's got any chance of joining. To my knowledge, this is an Erik ten Hag pursuit. I don't know if everybody at Manchester United is on board with that. And the reason being that it'll be really expensive. It'll be a battle with Daniel Levy. It will be a player who's 30 years old. So we know his quality and we're not doubting his goals or pedigree, but there's no resale value there. And we know finance is a big consideration in all of these things. And as far as I know, Harry Kane is not for sale, is Tottenham's perspective. And if anywhere, not to the Premier League and a rival, and Daniel Levy wouldn't want to sell unless perhaps the fee got absolutely monstrous. And we've got no evidence that that's likely to happen. He would like to sign Harry Kane to a new contract, and that Ange Postecoglou would get a good thing going on at Spurs. They would start moving in the right direction, being competitive next season. We've seen other clubs who become competitive quite quickly. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Harry Kane sees a Tottenham that he wants to stay at in the course of next season. He's a boyhood fan. His family are, their dream is really to win with Tottenham, but clearly that hasn't materialized so far. On your specific point, he did push in 2021 to join Manchester City, and it didn't get him very far because Daniel Levy will only do a deal if the terms are right for him and his club. And if you're to be brutal about it, that's his job. It's not to give Harry Kane what he wants. This time round, I don't sense much tension in the relationship. I think it feels quite amicable, that there is communication this time round, whereas I don't think there was last time. And so the dialogue will happen, I'm sure. We saw reports of Real Madrid. I do think they were keen on him, but it doesn't seem that they're going to pursue that. There have been suggestions of Paris Saint-Germain too. And Harry Kane will have a big say in this, because if it doesn't work out for him this summer, if next season doesn't work out, he knows that in the summer of 2024, he finally gains control after this long contract that I think was signed in 2018, and he becomes the author of his own destiny and can make the move he wants depending on the interest and his fitness, etc. So I sense relative calm, and it would surprise me if Harry Kane hands in a transfer request and risks antagonizing Tottenham and their supporters like we saw last time. I think things are quite settled for now, and there's not a great deal of movement, and that Manchester United are accepting of the fact that they'll probably have to focus on other targets.
So do you actually, when you look between now and, obviously I know we're still in June, so we have so long to go until the end of the window, But when you think about other players and obviously all the movement that's going on right now, do you think this Harry Kane one might just fizzle out pretty early and it won't be going on until transfer deadline day?
Yeah, I've given up predicting in this industry, Liv, because
You never
by the
know.
time I pick my phone up and the quality of reporting and the amount of activity going on under the surface and clubs trying to do things mean you really just never know. But my current expectation is that it's more likely that Harry Kane will stay. Maybe somebody makes an approach. There's desperation. Of course, the season will start before the window closes. And at that point, clubs will get a firmer indication of how they're looking, whether they really need a striker and they'll go all out for them at any expense. Maybe it's looking great for Tottenham. There are so many undetermined factors. But at the risk of being proved spectacularly wrong and having egg on my face and everybody regurgitating this clip on social media, I think the anticipation is that Harry Kane is going to stay at Tottenham.
And another player, we'll talk about Manchester United player now, is Marcus Rashford. Obviously, the club triggered a clause in his contract, so he's at the club until 2024. Now, this summer, it feels like crucial, doesn't it, for players coming into like the last year of their contracts. Do you expect him to sign a contract extension this summer?
Yeah, I think there's been positive progress. Marcus Rashford has always prioritised Manchester United. You know, he's come through the club. He's a massive fan. I don't think he's ever sort of actively wanted to be away from United and sees his future there. But of course, in all situations for all players, it doesn't necessarily work out like that. We've talked about Mason Mount already, for example. There was, some strong suggestions of Barcelona a few years ago that didn't end up materializing, but I do think their interest was credible. Was it Paris Saint-Germain last summer too? He's so highly regarded across the game at other clubs in England and abroad that if there was ever a glimmer of hope to prize him away, these clubs would take it and they would be willing to pay big transfer fees and salaries. And Manchester United know that, but they also know that if they can create the right environment, footballing wise, and also the financial conditions as well, then they'll be in a strong position. He's excelled under Erik ten Hag, top scorer last season. And then there were reports led by Fabrizio Romano, I think, in recent days that they're moving towards a new contract. It's on the verge now. It's not done, clearly. And one of the factors in that may be United's ownership situation, knowing who is going to be coming in, if anybody comes in, what finances and sign off is possible and by whom. But I've had nothing to suggest that Marcus Rashford isn't going to sign that contract. I think it's getting there. It just remains a matter of when more than if at this point in time. And it would take something surprising to change that course of action.
Does this sort of get into dangerous territory for Manchester United if, the start of the season happens and he still hasn't signed the contract extension and literally game by game, it's getting closer and closer to the end of his contract without him signing it?
Yeah, of course it gets into dangerous territory, especially for a player of this sort of ilk and importance and that attraction that we spoke about from other clubs. But the indications are that we're getting to the end of this process. And so if the terms are in place, the precise timing doesn't really matter. It's just the conclusion that matters. I don't think suddenly you start to derail unless behind the scenes it's not quite as advanced as people are suggesting. And if the ownership situation causes serious delays and getting towards the point of putting pen to paper, and of course it opens up unwanted possibilities for Manchester United. But I can't speak with authority on that because I don't know that there's any jeopardy around this. The indications look quite good from Manchester United's perspective. But it does point to a wider issue here because these conversations, I presume, have been going on for quite a long time and should have been wrapped up by now. If you're talking about a player of Marcus Rashford's level and how vital he is to United, he's their main man in attack at the moment, and so that brings a bit of unease that it even got this far. And the Manchester United ownership situation is clearly disrupting their ability to operate in the market, bring in players, hand out new contracts. Not completely, because they're pursuing Mason Mount, and they managed to get Luke Shaw done previously, and a couple of other deals here and there. But this one is sounding like it's of a really high value, and that takes more serious consideration from ownership and board level and approval and sign off. So you can understand that. And I think the ownership uncertainty right now, as we speak, could be cleared up in days for all we know, is not good at all. And that's something we've got to be clear about. But they'll like to think that doesn't materially affect Marcus Rashford's future.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, just the last player, or the last move I want to talk about, is Sandro Tonali from AC Milan to Newcastle. It looks like that's on its way to being done.
Yeah, again, these are such fast-moving stories that, for all we know, as you and I are speaking, it could have been wrapped up. So we reported on The Athletic last night that an agreement was close between Newcastle and AC Milan for a fee in the region of 70 million euros. He's Eddie Howe's top midfield target. He's got huge admiration for him, and understandably so. He's Milan's vice-captain, helped them to the Champions League semi-finals. He's an Italy international. In fact, I think he's playing this evening, is it, for the under-21s?
Under-21s, yeah.
So if all of the agreements get put in place, I suspect they'll try and get a medical done as soon as they can. And, that medical, as we're seeing with Kai Havertz, could take place abroad, but they've just got to finalize the terms. And I presume there'll be add-ons and payment structures like we're talking about for all of these deals. But yeah, Newcastle are in an excellent place to close out what would be a spectacular deal that would be tribute to their recruitment, identification, their scouting, their ability to negotiate deals, and keep the club moving, in the right direction. Their budget is not limitless, despite having their Saudi-led ownership, because of financial fair play, and so they've got to work within certain parameters. They've managed to bring in some really good signings during this ownership's reign and Eddie Howe's tenure as manager, and I think Tonali could be an absolute gem. Not many players come from Italy, especially when they're so deep-rooted. This will be a real blow to AC Milan and their fan base, but we're talking serious money. And if there's the desire there from Tonali, which we've got no reason to doubt, to come to Newcastle to play in the Champions League, they'll even want to be challenging again towards the top echelons of the Premier League, then that would be fantastic for them. And so, to answer your question, I think Sandro Tonali, barring any late twists, is going to be signing for Newcastle United.
David, thank you so much, as always. This was the Five Insider with me, Olivia Buzaglo, and David Ornstein. We will see you again very soon. I didn't know how to end that, so I just